I've been looking through countless games in a search of more survival type games, and the question dawned on me, what does make a survival game? So let's try and answer that today. But first, let's have a bit of a look at some history. I think most people would think of the original survival game to be Minecraft, released all the way back in 2011 and being the king ever since. But we would be wrong, because if we look back 8 years before that to 2003, we'd come across a game called Stranded. In this, you were funnily enough stranded on an island. You had to monitor your need for food and water, as well as collecting resources, fighting off a range of creatures on the island, including raptors, and also you could make buildings, weapons, and tools. So this all sounds like a survival game to me. There's even a map editor if you felt like making something a little more custom for your friends. Surprisingly though, we can go all the way back to 1982 and find a game on the Atari 2600 called Survival Island, developed and produced by Star Path Corporation. This game was split up into 3 parts, where the first part you're on a raft trying to make your way to an island, avoiding all the sharks and sea monsters along the way, while also collecting food and water to survive later on the island. And then when you get to the island, you'll also be monitoring your food and water situation there to stay alive. So yeah, we might have the very first ever survival video game ever made, and that was 40 years ago. So that's a very brief history on survival games, but let's get back to what actually makes a survival game. Obviously we need some sort of mechanic outside of a health bar to measure how we're surviving against the environment, and that usually comes in a measure of a food and water system at a minimum, with some games being a bit more creative about it, such as Valheim, where you don't actually die from a lack of food, but instead food acts as a buff. So better food will actually give you more health and stamina. Not a bad way of doing things if you ask me. Well, at least it's a little bit better than some games where you get to eat like 10 large meals just to not starve for an hour. Other games such as Green Hell and Don't Starve have a sanity system, where if you don't keep that in check, it can potentially lead to your death. Which is kind of funny in Green Hell, when I've been playing co-op before and wondering why I'm not seeing the tribesmen and they're attacking the other player. But yeah, it all kind of makes sense now. A lot of survival games will have some sort of environmental hazard system, where at least at the start of the game, you're having to fight the cold and the heat, but that usually becoming less of a hassle with the more technology and usually clothing that you can find. That definitely feels like a bit of a staple for survival games for me. One of the big things that people think of with survival games is collecting resources. Yep, all that mining ore and cutting down trees, some of us think of it as an endless grind, and some of us view it as part of the experience. Either way, you can pretty much guarantee that nowadays you'll be gathering for something, be that a new weapon, some armor, or a nice house to live in. One of the features that draws me to what I consider a survival game is the open world aspect, where I can go in any direction I feel like and not feel restricted at all in some sort of linear fashion. Sure, if I go to the north, I might encounter some trolls who are a little bit too tough for me, but hey, that's my choice to make, and if I end up in a troll's belly, then that's down to me. While not essential though, it's also good to have a survival game that can be procedurally generated, but hey, that's more of a personal preference than what I would call a staple for a survival game. Lastly, let's have a look at what the good old Wikipedia page tells us. Survival games are a subgenre of action video games, usually set in hostile, intense open world environments. Players generally begin with minimal equipment and are required to survive as long as possible by crafting tools, weapons, shelters, and collecting resources. After looking over many survival games, what they have in common seems to be some form of character management besides a health bar, an open world to go explore, be that the procedural or the same map that everybody has, and last but not least, some form of crafting that you can do, which usually involves some form of building mechanic as well. For instance, Skyrim and Cyberpunk have the open world and crafting, but they don't have any sort of character management unless you use a mod. So, as long as you have all these things, then I think we can safely assume it's a survival game. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with what I said? Do you think this does or doesn't make a survival game? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for listening guys. I'll catch you later.